Hello, welcome to Reel Film Snobs. I'm Angela Yeager. I'm pleased to have with me back on the show once again my good friend Autumn Edwards. Welcome to the show, Autumn.
Thanks for having me.
So, Autumn and I had an adventure. We decided to go on our first, well, my first post COVID film festival and your first film festival, period.
hmm
We went to the Seattle International Film Festival in May, and we are here to present our favorites of the best films we saw. I think total, including some ones we watched on streaming, we saw about 17 films.
Yeah, I
Um,
think we watched more if you count the streaming, actually. I think that was closer to almost the in
18 or
person.
19,
Yeah,
yeah. And we saw at least 12 actually in person at the film festival. And this was my first time going to Seattle International Film Festival, which is, pretty large. It's in five venues over, it's actually 10 days, and we weren't able to go because we have jobs and things. We weren't able to go for the full 10 days. So we went for about half of the festival and got to see a lot of great films. And I'm just curious for you, Autumn, as someone who's a newbie to film festival going, what were your reflections and thoughts, and would you do it again?
yeah, I would absolutely do it again. First of all, it was a super fun time. I really enjoyed it. Seattle is, I think, outside of the price, a good city to host it in because most of them we could walk to, which was nice. There were a few locations that were out of the way, but for the most part, it was very convenient, if you get situated right in downtown. And the movies were great. It was fun to see such a wide array of films. We even saw like one, um, oldie that they brought back, The Glass Web in 3D, which was super fun. They had a very like wide spread, I would say. And I think it was very tiring, but very worth it.
Yeah, that's pretty much the film festival experience. It's not a vacation like lying on the beach with an umbrella type of vacation, which, I like those kind of vacations too. But this is definitely, only for, I think, cinephiles, but to really do a
hmm
true film festival. I think a lot of the folks who probably live locally don't see as many as we were seeing each day. So, I mean, there's a different kind of experience when you live in the place where the film festival is happening and you can kind
Yeah.
of just drop in on one or two movies. But when you're trying to intensely get as many in as possible, it can be tiring, but it's also very rewarding because you get to see a lot of great cinema in a short
hmm
amount of time. And one thing I did appreciate about Seattle compared to some other film festivals I've been to is the wide range of films they had because it is a bigger city compared to, for instance, Bend or Ashland or Santa Barbara, which are the three main festivals I've been to in recent years. There was a much greater diversity of types of films and much edgier type films, especially in
hmm
the what they called the WTF section, which we have several that we're going to be talking about from that section, and we tended to select a lot from that section, which were the more avant-garde, bizarre, edgy, out there type
Eclectic.
movies. Eclectic, yeah, is one word. That's probably a nicer word, but some of them are pretty edgy. So I think with that said, we can probably jump right into the first film that I know we both really enjoyed and definitely fits in that WTF section, the eclectic section, and it's called F Toys. I can't say the real name of the film because we air on a few channels that don't allow cursing, but I think you can kind of figure it out, folks, what you think it might mean. This is a 16 millimeter film about a character played by the director herself, Annapurna, who is a young woman who is seeking salvation from a curse. She's had multiple psychics, starting with the wonderful Big Frida, who those who are familiar with bounce music from New Orleans would be familiar with her. And they tell her, you can have the curse lifted for about $1,000 and you have to sacrifice a baby lamb. Neither of these things are things she's thrilled about, but she decides to go on a journey on her little scooter and figure out a way to make $1,000 quickly to lift this curse. Her character is, I believe, supposed to be a sex worker, and so that's the way she makes her money and does gets into kind of otherworldly experiences navigating, trying to raise this money. And it almost becomes less about, at some point, really raising the money than just all these very strange, oddball characters that she runs into on her journey. This movie is definitely not one that's for everyone, for sure. But I enjoyed it. It is campy, but it's funny. At the screening during the Q&A, and there was the director was there, and Annapurna, and the person interviewing her mentioned that they thought it was like, they compared it to John Waters or Greg Araki. I feel like that's, I mean, it's sort of in the ballpark. I feel like it's more serious than John Waters and maybe not as serious as Greg Araki. So it's maybe somewhere in the middle
Hmm.
between those. Definitely not as violent as some of Greg Araki's films can be, or as harsh, but definitely more serious and more harsh than John Waters.
Yeah,
And
I think
she,
it's, I was
yeah,
going to say, I think it's using kind of the aesthetics of John Waters more so, and leaning a little bit towards Iraqi as far as themes and, depth and character work.
Yeah, and some of it, what I mentioned to you after I saw it is it reminded me of a director, Anna Biller, who's a more recent director who made The Love Witch, which was kind of a cult classic. And it's kind of a throwback to 70s cinema, her films. And it reminded me, particularly in the look of the film, of that more than John Waters. John Waters, one thing with him is he often uses non-professional actors, which is very different here. One thing that I think really stuck out about F-Toys is she mentioned this in the QA, she actually wanted to cast professional working actors who normally don't get work because they're queer or they're people of color or they're fat or they're just odd looking or whatever, but they're professional actors from like the New York theater scene. So she cast the movie with real professional actors. And I think that actually elevates the material because, and it takes away from the camp a little bit because you don't have the kind of level of non-professional acting that you would often have like in a John Waters movie. I thought the
Yeah.
performances particularly, and I didn't write down her name, the woman who plays kind of her friend that she meets along the way slash girlfriend, maybe her love interest. It's a little unclear their relationship, but like she, I thought was quite good in the movie and very effective and a bit of a tragic character ultimately.
Hmm. Yeah, they're queer, so their relationship is, of course, a little unclear. Um, but yeah, I totally agree with the performances and everything. They were all uniformly really good, and I think camp kind of relies on sort of this meta level of like the viewer looking at the production as a production rather than just giving themselves over to the movie. And that's kind of what adds to some of the humor of it. And because this is so well executed, it doesn't really have you're never feeling like you're laughing at the construction of the movie or the production of it. You're laughing because the jokes are funny and because the actors deliver it really well. And so I totally agree. Like I think it's a really fascinating movie that treads an interesting line that you're just not going to find very often anywhere. I'd be surprised to see this one get wide distribution of any kind just because of the nature of it, but it is a gem.
Yeah, for sure. And like you said, it's very unlikely, this is the type of thing you go to film festivals for because, like you said, it's very unlikely to get distribution. I made a comment like maybe if John Waters championed it, it would have a chance. But even then, I'd be surprised to see it other than on like a very obscure streaming service because
Mhm.
the name alone kind of, would keep most, theatrical distributors away. But definitely worth seeing. And
We need
the
Tubi to the rescue,
yeah,
please.
Tubi or a Mubi, maybe the other Ubi.
Yeah, yeah.
So anyway, yeah, definitely enjoyed this one. So why don't we move on to your next one?
So the next one we'll talk about is called Black News Terms and Conditions. It's directed by Kahlil Joseph. It's a really fascinating movie. It's kind of hard to speak about just because of its construction and things. There's not much of a narrative to it, but it is an Afrofuturist film that follows a few different characters on the sci-fi ship called the Nautilus as it travels from America to Africa. And it uses this as an opportunity to explore Black history through a very wide-ranging multimedia lens. It employs archival footage, newspaper clippings, social media footage, music, newly shot stuff, interviews, 3D renderings, and more to create what, in the director's own words, plays kind of like a concept album. You can feel it's very musically influenced. Obviously, the music in it is fantastic too, but the way that it plays out experientially, I see kind of what he means because it is chopped up into these different kind of little sections that each have their own unique feel and atmosphere. And it does feel like you're, playing through a concept album in that way. It's a lot of information. Sometimes it can be like a sensorial overload, but I feel like that's correct for it because its mission is to capture and transmit the Afro-American or African American experience, which is just too vast and complex. There's too much depth to ever be covered in any medium, let alone a less than 2 hour film. So I just think it's an absolute feat of art. Like it's just beautifully crafted. Everything that they shot is gorgeous. Its construction is a wonder. It's like really just a monumental film. I don't know how they possibly sourced all this footage and then wove it into this thing that's not just coherent, but like really deeply layered. And like, I don't know, it's something that's hard to talk about because it's so unlike anything else. We kind of talked about on our Obayashi film episodes, how some of his are like essay films, and this is
Hmm.
certainly in that vein, but it's never boring or didactic. It really has a great pace to it. There's a really wonderful verve, and I just think it's something that has to be seen to be believed.
Yeah. Yeah, and another one that I think will be a hard sell, less because of the title and that, because essay type films don't always, you know, are hard to sell. Like you have trouble describing it, and we're in the era of a movie has to be described in like one sentence, like an elevator
Mhm.
pitch, right? And this one is not easy to do that with. There's a small section where there's a clip from Godard, and I definitely felt both the influence of Godard and Varda in this film, in that Kahlil Joseph does not want to. It's not about genre. He wants to Varda on the sense of, and he even quotes her in the movie, like who Varda's not a fan of genre because she mixed genres a lot in her films, and I think he's definitely getting to that. Like at one point he says, "This isn't a documentary," and then you're like, "Okay, well, what is it then?" And then Godard, in terms of interrogating cinema itself, and from a political viewpoint, from a very specific political viewpoint, and then like just kind of cramming so much information into a movie that your head almost explodes. But even if you don't get all the references, which I think very few people probably would get every single thing in the movie, you could watch it just as a visually, as you mentioned, the visuals are beautiful, and as an experience, and then try to learn something. Like I actually, after we watched this movie, looked up a few of, I obviously knew about Marcus Garvey and W.E. Du Bois and these people, but I wanted, especially Garvey, because I spent so much time talking about him. I wanted to read more about him. Du Bois, I learned about in school, so I knew a little bit more about him. But just felt like, oh, I kind of want to educate myself more about some of these figures that are obviously very important to the message of this movie. And but then he brings in well-known figures like them, but also there's some pretty obscure references as well. So I thought that was all really great. He's obviously he's a hometown hero, which was cool. Like Cahill Joseph is from Seattle, doesn't isn't there anymore. But so I was a little disappointed that it didn't win any of the awards at the festival because he is kind of hometown hero, and there was a good sized crowd. I don't think it was a sold out one, but it was pretty full. And
Mhm.
he was there in person. Not the most talkative person in the world. So,
He was
didn't,
very quiet and
yeah.
mild-mannered. It was kind of cute. He was like he seemed shy and yeah.
Yeah, they mentioned in the Q&A that he, I guess, did some video work with Kendrick Lamar. So if that gets
Mhm.
people, I mean, I'd say whatever gets people to watch this, they should use that to help market it because it's going to need all the help it can get. Because this is another one that's not something you could easily see playing at your local art house theater. So, but again, I think it's challenging, like a Godard movie. I think Godard would love this movie if he was still alive. It actually made me sad that he's not here to see it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting though, right? Because it is challenging, but it's also, like you said, really easy to just sit back and watch and appreciate as kind of a music video. So it's
Yeah.
it's a super fascinating piece, and I like what you said about how it examines film and its position like within the wider scope of things. There's an object that's discussed in the film that I can't remember the name of, but it acts as kind of like a locus of power, and it like draws power in and then can disseminate it to others, empowering them. And I feel like that's kind of how he views film, and hopefully this film, right? It's drawing from all these different sources and concentrating in this one object, which can hopefully then get shared out to others and, enlighten them in different ways. And I thought that was super fascinating. And again, just going back to its construction, Kahlil also mentioned in the Q&A that, he knows that we live in this era of like short attention span and, everybody wants something new kind of thing. And he edited this film with his editors, of course, to be, like that concept album we talked about, you can chop it up into distinct sections. And he said he wouldn't even be surprised to see, you know, this scene on YouTube and that scene, wherever on TikTok, like
Right. And he was
broken up in
conscious of it
different
and okay
ways.
with that. Like he was like, that'll be
Hmm.
great if people just chopped this up and put certain sections on YouTube, which a lot of filmmakers would not want their films. That's not the way they mean them to be
Yeah,
seen. They want them to be seen as a whole, not chopped up. So that's also very interesting. In a
yeah,
way, you
it's
think of the DJ culture also and hip hop culture, which is all about chopping up and sampling and, all of that is part of the bones of this movie.
Yeah, it's super impressive because I think it just speaks to the power and, how well constructed each individual part is. I do think they can stand on their own. Most movies are like a single linear narrative that if you took out any given piece, you've lost the context. But
Hmm.
in this one, it does have, a through line from start to end, but it can also be taken kind of at face value, scene to scene. It's just super, super fascinating. I think it's like an incredible work. I think everyone should watch it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think shouldn't offend people like maybe our first one did, but I don't think, people that think maybe like Marvel is the be all and end all would probably struggle to get through this one. But our show isn't for those people anyway. So we'll move on.
For the snobs.
Yes, we're the snobs.
So moving on, our next film we're going to be discussing is Happy End, directed by Sora. And Happy End is the story of a group of high school students in near future Japan. Japan is, of course, being plagued by earthquakes, but these are just foreshocks to a much larger, more destructive earthquake that's soon to come. So the students are high school students, and they're a mix of Japanese and other ethnicities, and they struggle under an increasingly authoritarian administration of their school, echoing the political climate at large. And their friendships are tested as they deal with not just surviving this brutal system that's designed to alienate and punish them, but the natural changes that come with the passage of time and the different directions their lives are taking them. So it's one of my favorite genres, coming of age. I really adore these. I think the characters in this one are really well fleshed out. And even though they're like, the perfect UN of high school Japanese students, where it's like there's one of each, there's two native, or Japanese boys. There's one who's Zainichi, half Korean. There's a half Chinese girl. There's an African American Japanese boy. Like it's really just kind of a sampling of all these different demographics. But I think each of them is really well fleshed out, and the relationships that they have with each other, they really felt, real to me. I think they were amazing actors. I think only like one of them was actually a professional actor, which is really interesting, and not even like the main, one of the two main
Hmm.
characters that we follow. But each of them does a wonderful job. I loved its exploration of Japanese identity, xenophobia, historical amnesia, the disillusionment of youth, and like the resistance to AI and technocracy, which is, creeping into our lives. Well, not even creeping, it's kind of coming full charge now. But I think is a really great exploration of these things.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this one as well. And I think for a first feature, I think this is the director's first feature. I'm really excited to see what Soro does in the future. You could probably talk a little bit about his leg or his
Hmm.
family and everything. But one of the things I thought was really interesting about it is, it's supposed to be kind of futuristic, but it really just seems like it could be most of it now,
Hmm.
the surveillance. But, what I think we can relate with in 2025 is that feeling of dread of being like controlled and having this overall, like everyone's made to comply by being put in a state of fear. And
Hmm.
so the students, some of the students are like, oh, it's just easier to comply. We don't want to rock the boat. when some of the students want to kind of protest about what the school administration is doing, and he's using a school as kind of a microcosm of the bigger world here, which I think works really well,
Hmm.
because it can be hard. I mean, a movie that tries to take on huge political issues of a whole country right now. I mean, this is like a microcosm of what we can seeing happen in so many countries around the world right now, including our own. Using technology to control people, using fear and anxiety to control people, getting people to comply in advance with fascist or authoritarian motives. And so I think we see that happening here. People being othered, there's a lot of that being explored in this film, as you mentioned, because some of the students are not quote unquote native Japanese, even though, like, one of the students, the one who's got Korean heritage, has been there, family's been there 100 years. They're still
Hmm.
like, you don't belong here, and it's like, well, how do you have to be somewhere before you belong there? Isn't 100 years enough? So,
Yeah.
so these questions, and they even in the class say, oh, where, they do a military recruitment scene that I thought was brilliant, where they ask all the students who aren't quote unquote Japanese to leave. And it's like, at some point, it seemed like half the class got up and left. So
Yeah, it felt
at
like
some
more.
point, yeah. So, which may not be realistic to like modern Japan, but could be someday, right?
Hmm.
Like our
They've
our
got a
popul
declining population, right?
right, and populations around the world are less and less homogenous, which
Hmm.
I think is a good thing. But it's like, at what point do you say, well, okay, what is it mean to be American? Well, we know what people often mean when they say that. They mean, white, male,
Yeah.
etc. But I think in this film, they're showing that in a creative way through these young people and the different perspectives. Like the one student, he really wants to fight, and the other one who's into music is just like, well, I just want to do music. I don't want to deal with this
Hmm.
stuff because it's going to happen anyway, whether we
Yeah.
fight or not. And so I just want to enjoy myself because I'm young. And he doesn't seem selfish or stupid for thinking that. There is a perspective where you're like, well, yeah, he's
He's
kind of right, in a
he's,
way.
giving into the nihilism that I think is a natural result of, his surrounding area.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really enjoyed this one. It felt like very true because the director is the son of Ryuichi Sakamoto, famous composer like Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, and many others. But he was born in New York, but raised in both New York and Tokyo. So he has that international perspective, and I'm sure he struggles, with like Japanese or American identity and how these things, play into his own life. So
Hmm.
it's a very personal movie in that way too, and I really felt that and appreciated it.
Yeah, very accomplished first feature. I can't wait to see what he does next. So we'll move on to our last film, which is Paying for It, 2025 from Sook-Yin Lee. This is a movie that was a comedy. It's set in the late 90s, and it's about Chester Brown, who's a real life person, but the movie is fiction. He's a graphic novelist, and he's in a relationship with Sunny, who is actually the stand-in for the director Sook-Yin Lee. We found out, we didn't know this watching the movie until after the Q&A. This is her. So she was in a relationship with Chester Brown for many years. They were in a long-term committed romantic relationship, lived in a house together, but then she is unhappy. She wants to explore having sex and having relationships with other people. So they kind of decide to have basically an open relationship at the beginning. When we know how well those always work out. And big shocker, it doesn't work out that great. So she starts dating other men, having relationships with other men. He moves into the basement, but then he's kind of like, well, what am I supposed to do? He's not really interested in having another relationship because he's still in love with Sunny, but he definitely wants to have sex still. So he starts to see sex workers. And then he decides, hey, I like this, I like that there's no commitment and no one expects anything from me. I don't have to expect anything from them. He's not a crazy pervert. He goes in and he's just, the first time he has it, they're like, do you want this? Do you want this? He's like, no, I just want to have regular vaginal intercourse. And the sex worker's kind of like, oh, okay, so he's just very, but he's also then, discovers more about himself through this process. And so, yes, it's actually maybe one of two or three films we saw that dealt with sex workers in totally different ways. But one of the things I really liked about this movie, besides the fact it was much funnier, much better than I thought it was, it really showed this community in Toronto. It made me really, I've been wanting to visit Toronto for a long time, made me want to visit there even more. but it also shows the complexity of like, modern relationships at times and how people can be in love because you do really feel like Sunny and Chester are still very much in love with each other, but not really be great as a romantic couple.
Hmm.
Which I thought was very interesting, and it's got a lot of funny parts. He's a fairly acclaimed underground graphic novelist, so I would say fans of American Splendor, the Paul Giamatti film, if folks have seen that, you might like this movie. This one is much more sexually forward. There's a lot of nudity, including a lot of male nudity, but it's not a fun. It's not like in your. I mean, there's
It's not
sex in it.
leering.
No, no, and it's not over the top. It's not. Yeah, it's not done in a way it's pretty tasteful,
It's very
actually.
tastefully done. Yeah, it's very restrained. Like, and it's great too because, for as light as the film is, because it's a comedy, it feels very mature because of that too, right? Like, it has this nuanced view of sex workers and relationships and how, one can move through these, different areas of life and deal with it. And I don't know, I really enjoyed the general atmosphere that it created. Like it felt very approachable and like you said, it's not it's not making a spectacle of it all. It's kind of just taking it as a fact of life and, exploring the nuances.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's based on the graphic novel. Chester Brown did a graphic novel about his experiences, but which is again another similarity to American Splendor because that's also based on the graphic novel that the guy did about his experiences. But it's different in that, and I thought it was very interesting in the Q&A, the director said they actually they took quite a few years to make this movie because the first version, she basically just tried to film the graphic novel as it was, and it wasn't working as a film to do that. And she decided she had to basically change it to make it a movie. And so it's not the graphic novel just in a film version. It's quite changed. And you could even see that with the character of Sunny. I mean, obviously he changed her name, but like when you meet Sook-Yin Lee in person, she's nothing like the character in the movie at all. It's hard to actually even imagine that they were once the same person because Sunny comes off as more timid. She obviously has confidence issues because she keeps just going from one loser guy to another, a lot of whom kind of treat her like crap. And when you meet the director, it's like hard to imagine this was the same woman. Of course, she's older now too, but she just seems to have so much confidence and not be anything like someone who would be stepped on. So, yeah, I enjoyed it. It was nice to see a good comedy at a film festival because I have to say that's pretty rare.
Hmm.
Film festivals, I mean, movies in general, it's just hard to find good comedies, but film festivals tend to be, indie art house movies tend to be dark and
Hmm.
foreboding and so it was nice to see that. We actually saw several decent comedies at this
Yeah,
festival.
it was like a breath of fresh air. Like I would totally watch it again too. Like you said, it was very funny. I feel like definitely most of the jokes landed. I just had a great time with it. I feel like we don't get a lot of movies like this, anymore, not just in film festivals, but just out in the world. I don't see a lot of
Yeah,
things
not
like
enough
this
good
in theaters.
comedies.
Yeah, not just because the themes, but just the comedies. Yeah. So I really
And with
appreciated
good
it.
characters that are well developed, that's another thing. And so
Hmm.
both Chester and Sonny are really interesting people, and and I sympathize with both of them more than I was expecting to. So
Hmm.
anyway, I know we need to wrap up. So this is our first of two parts. We'll be doing another episode on the Seattle Film Festival, so be looking for that. So we'll have a total of 8 movies to recommend to you, and some of those might be coming to a theater near you, some maybe not. Thank you as always. Thanks, Autumn, for being on the show. Have a great day and great movies.
Bye.